Good morning, everyone. Happy Easter to everyone as well. I pray that God is still shining His face on you and blessing you through this time of social distancing. I pray that you're growing closer to Him and growing in your faith. This morning for our sermon, I actually want to start where I left off last week. I want to start back in Matthew chapter 4 where we were last week. If you remember last week, we talked about from Matthew chapter 4 some of the basic ideas of discipleship. We talked about how at Matthew chapter 5, Jesus has disciples, and those couple of paragraphs leading up to Matthew chapter 5 give us some really good tips as for what it means to go out and make disciples like the end of Matthew tells us to do in the Great Commission. Well, I wanted to go back to that because I kind of said last week that summation that Matthew gives for Jesus' message, I wanted to go back to that, and I wanted to give us at least something of that. So if you look in Matthew chapter 4, verse 23, it says this, that Jesus went throughout all of Galilee, and He was teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. You know, I said last week that proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, that is our message. That is really what we're to go out and to be sharing with the world as we make disciples, the way the Great Commission says. But you know, if I tried to sum up what that means, this good news of the kingdom, it'd be really difficult to do. If I tried to give you everything that phrase really meant, I don't think I could do it even in, a series of sermons of 4 or 5. But what I do want to do is I want to give you at least the basics of what this meant as Jesus was saying this in this time. Well, to do that, we've got to go back really before there was much of a kingdom to speak of. Back in 2 Samuel chapter 8, there was this promise that God gave to David. Now, this promise was before then, and there were traces of it even after, and really all throughout the Old Testament. But I wanted to go here in 2 Samuel chapter 8 to just give you the basics idea of what was expected out of this. 2 Samuel chapter 8, starting in verse 12, says this, "When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body and will establish your kingdom. He shall build a house for my name and will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the Son of Men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me, and your throne shall be established forever." Now, think about what happens after that. He says this to David, and Solomon comes after. And one thing you see with a lot of these prophecies is that they actually end up being fulfilled on multiple levels. So yes, Solomon comes after, and just like it says, he does establish a house for his name. And there is that part of discipline in there. That definitely happens with Solomon. He makes his mistakes, and God deals with those. But there's one little thing about this that we don't necessarily see fulfilled in Solomon alone. It's that big word forever. It says twice there that this kingdom and this throne would be established forever. Well, think about the history after the time of David. Solomon does create this big kingdom in the name of this royal line of David. It ends up being probably the high point of Israel as a kingdom. Many things are built, including the temple. Solomon builds his house, and their influence and land spreads, and everything grows fine. However, after Solomon passes away, shortly thereafter, the kingdom divides. It actually splits off into a northern and a southern kingdom. And skipping through a lot of the years, there's lots of good and bad kings. There's lots of wars and battles and different things that go on. And eventually, what we see is the northern kingdom is defeated, and those people are taken off into exile. And the southern kingdom still holding on to hope, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago. They thought, maybe this wouldn't happen to them, but yet they see these nations around them growing stronger. Well, eventually their day does come. They are destroyed. They are taken off into exile. Now, this point here is where God starts to speak through the prophets. This is where He starts to remind them of this. But when I think about what it meant for them to be in exile, I think for those of us born in America, we don't really truly understand the full depths of what it meant for them. We don't understand what it means to be taken from your home. You live somewhere, you're defeated, and then they up and march you up back to their country. They're taken from their culture. Whether they're still in Judah or whether they're taken off to Assyria, they still are not having the same culture, because now all the cultural influences of those that are in power over them, that's the culture that you see. They're forced to serve people that often despise them or look down on them. Exile for them was not in any way this kind of manageable experience. It was tearing apart from them everything that previously they had seen as their identity. This was their lowest point in a lot of ways. But it was at this lowest point that God reminds them of that promise. If you look in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, it says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." They were told while they were in exile that there would be a new king. That there would be a king that would make Zion and Jerusalem shout for joy. Even though they were in exile, even though they were taken off, they were told that this king was going to come. And so they were looking forward to this. Even in the midst of this exile, this persecution, this difficult time, they were looking forward to this king that would bring about that kingdom, that throne that God said he would establish forever. Well, this is not the only place it happens. If you look in Isaiah 52, you actually get this beautiful picture. It starts off like this in verse 7. It says, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns." You know, for us, we think about feet and on the mountains, and that doesn't make sense to us. But for them, what this was a picture of a messenger. This was someone bringing news. You know, think about today, I'm recording this video, and then shortly thereafter, it's going to be all over the internet, where people all over the world could have it. Now, you know, I'm not going to claim that I'm someone in international superstar or anything, but they could. That message goes out quickly, and we don't fully understand how it was back then. But back then, that message was taken physically by a person. And if you wanted that message to get there quicker, if you wanted that quicker download or upload speed, they had to run fast. And so that's what they did, is they would take these messages and they would run them from city to city. And so your runners of today, the Patrick Folkers of the world, those were your messengers. They were the ones that took the message from one city to another to another. And so what they're saying here is, how beautiful is it when that message comes? And now see, that seems a little weird because, you know, when we think about mail or things, it's not that beautiful. But what's beautiful about it is the message that's being brought. What if it said something like this? How beautiful is that text notification of that boy or girl that you really like? Or how beautiful is it the mail truck that brings that check that you've been waiting for? Maybe it's a refund check. You know, think about it in those kind of ways. Is that silly, mundane thing? It's saying, how beautiful is it when that brings about the good news? So the news is the focus here. Well, what is that news? Your God reigns. It's that kingdom again. It's saying God is still on his throne. Look at verse 8. The voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice. Together they sing for joy. For eye to eye they see the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth together in singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm before the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. Once again, we see this prophecy, and we know from history that part of this does come true. They are brought back from exile. A change in kingdom brings about a change in fortunes, and they're actually allowed to go back to where they were before. But yet, still part of that is not there. In a lot of ways, the Lord hasn't fully returned back to Zion, back to Jerusalem. That king is still not back on the throne the way that they expect. Yeah, they had a king, but that king was really more of a puppet. It didn't do God's will. It did the will of whatever country was ruling over them at the time. There was a surprising lack of that king that they were waiting for. And the rule of God they see from that king. They don't see that. So there wasn't this king. The prophets we don't have a record of there being prophets after a certain point. And then there's this long drought where it seems like God may be silent, at least in the biblical story. And so hundreds of years go by, and then, as we see in the Gospels like Matthew, John the Baptist shows up. And John the Baptist shows up with this message that the kingdom is at hand, that it's not him, he's not that king, but that kingdom is coming. He's the herald before the king saying, hey, guess what, guys? The king is on his way. And the message is going out. Drawing back to these verses that we just read, that Isaiah 52, here's this good news, this good message. How beautiful are the feet of John the Baptist bringing this message that the king is coming. And then like Matthew says in chapter 4:23, the gospel of the kingdom is what Jesus proclaimed. He said, hey, the kingdom is here and I am bringing it about. He starts his ministry as the one that's restoring the reign of God's kingdom. Now, with every claim like that, with every prophet of the Old Testament, these things are only proven true after the fact. That's a great message. That's a great thing being said. But is what he is saying true? Is the kingdom really being brought about? Is he that king that is promised? Is God once again reigning over his people? Is this the throne that would be established forever? That's the question. See, Jesus goes about proclaiming this message, but the question that we face today and the question that they faced then is it true? Is the kingdom truly at hand? You know, when I think about that, think about what you would expect to see. What would you see if there truly was a change in king? What would you see if there really was this new kingdom? You know, from the Israelites' perspective, this is something they were very aware of. Think about the fact that they were brought back to exile. That only happened because a new kingdom was in charge. They know very well what it looks like to see one kingdom overthrow another one. So what things would you be looking for? Well, I think there's three that I want us to see today. Three things that I want us to see that truly shows us that this kingdom is being brought about. The first one is a new king. It can't be the same kings as before. It can't be the puppet kings that they had. It has to be a new king, a king that is bringing about something new. Not only that, there has to be followers for that king. Is this king just out on his own saying this stuff, or does he actually have power? Is there actually people following him? You can't have a kingdom without followers, without people in that kingdom. A king by himself does not make a kingdom. And then the last thing, there's a great victory. Did that king overthrow the powers that were at hand? Is that king actually bringing about change through these victories? They had seen this time and time again, whether it be the Assyrians or the Persians or later the Romans. They knew what it meant to have a new king, to see the followers that went with it, and to see the victories that took place. Well, when we think about that, what better time to look at this than right now? If you follow the Advent calendar, last Sunday was Palm Sunday. Today, as I'm recording this, is Good Friday. And as you're watching this, it's Easter Sunday. This is the week where all this is either proven true or proven false. This is the week where all these questions are answered. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 21, starting in verse 1. This is Palm Sunday. This is that Sunday where Jesus comes to Jerusalem as this king. As Matthew starts in verse 1 of this chapter, when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage to the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, the one we just read, saying, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did Jesus just as he had directed him. They brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. Most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowd that went before him, that followed him, were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd says, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee." For us, we may not know or understand this image, but this image was very clear. In fact, we see it a couple of times in the Old Testament. See, kings, as they went off and won these battles, they would come back, and they would come back to these great processions where everybody was shouting and cheering, the king is back, the king is victorious, the king is still alive after coming back from this battle. And here Jesus returns to Jerusalem. And what do we see? We see him riding on the donkey, just like we read earlier. We see him coming back in this procession. He's got followers. He's showing himself to be king. People are laying down their cloaks as a sign of obedience to him, as a sign of honor to him. They're laying down palm branches, which palm branches were the Jewish symbol of nationality. Here is this throne. Here is this kingdom. As Palm Sunday shows us, the king has come to Jerusalem just like they've been looking for all along. But not only Palm Sunday, when we look at Good Friday, we know from those of us that have heard the story of Jesus before, when he returns to Jerusalem, it wasn't met with open arms. In fact, those that were in power really did not like what Jesus was bringing about. They did everything that they could to put him down and ultimately put him on a cross to his death. But leading into that crucifixion, I want you to see in Matthew 27, starting in verse 27, some of this imagery, because we're trying to see, is he the king? It says in verse 27 of Matthew 27, the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they striped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. And they put a reed in his right hand, and kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit on him, and they took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put on his own clothes and led him away to crucify him. Palm Sunday gave us that procession, that high point of seeing the king return to the city of Jerusalem. But Jesus knew what was coming. Multiple Gospels record his lament over Jerusalem, realizing that the powers at hand were not going to let him come and just be accepted, but he knew very well what it was going to mean. See, in an ironic twist, he is given a robe. He is given a crown. He is given a scepter. He is being called the King of the Jews, and he is lifted up for everyone to see. But not in the way that we as the world would expect. Instead, he was lifted up to suffer. Was he the king? Absolutely. I think even those that didn't really think he was the king ended up playing right into that hand, showing that he very well was the king. Did he have followers? Absolutely. Was it those soldiers? No, not necessarily. But Matthew makes it very clear throughout his gospel that many times many refer to him as that son of David, the one that would bring about that promise to establish the kingdom forever. So then the final question is, was there a victory? What about that great victory? Yes, he was the king. Yes, he had followers. But did he conquer the powers at hand? Did he overcome the current establishment, the current kingdom that was there? Did he win that great victory? Even his followers weren't very sure. When you think about after he died, many of his followers scattered. They were scared for their own lives. That was Friday, but Sunday was coming. In Matthew chapter 28, starting in verse 1, now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the woman, Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he has said. Now come and see the place where he lay. Then they went quickly and told the disciples that he was risen from the dead. In the history of humanity, We've seen great kings that build sprawling cities and amazing wonders, amazing buildings and feats of engineering and construction. We've seen great kings that conquer large sections of geography. We see them conquer from ends of the earth, at least in their own eyes. We've seen great kings develop amazingly destructive weapons of war and armies that in a moment's notice can show up anywhere in the world and be ready to fight a war wherever it may be. We've seen great kings lead countries to some of the greatest technological achievements known to man. We've seen all these things. But have we ever seen a king defeat death itself? Not just put it off. Have we ever seen a king defeat that one thing that gets us all in time? Death. We have never seen a king do this. And when Jesus stands before His disciples and says later in that chapter in verse 17, they saw Him, they worshiped Him, but some doubted. And Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. When someone had said that throughout history, when these kings of old said, hey, look, I own everything that you can see. I own the whole world. All these statements that were made before. We know from 2020 hindsight that is not true. But when Jesus says that all authority has been given to Him and He had just defeated death, I'm tempted to believe Him. For somebody to defeat the one thing that no one has ever defeated, to be raised again 3 days, to be standing there as a living person in front of them, and to be active in this world today, do we believe that He was raised and defeated that one enemy that no one had done before? He was the king. He had followers. And yes, He had a victory. So let's back up here. His message all along was that His kingdom was at hand. That time had come where someone would sit on that throne, that Jesus would sit on that throne and establish the kingdom of God forever. And it would never be destroyed. He acted like a king. Maybe not like the worldly kings that we've seen before, but He did all of the things that they were looking for and expecting for that king to do. He gained followers before He was crucified, after He was crucified. And even to today, we see millions of Christians around the world that still follow Him, that still are claiming Him as their king. Those things are really not up for debate. You know, even people that doubt know that there was a Jesus that lived, that know that He made these claims, that there were people that follow Him. Those things are not up for debate. The question is, do you believe in His victory? Do you believe that He triumphed over death? Do you believe that He won a battle against sin, that we can start to fight back in our own lives because of that? Do you believe that His victory as King? You know, John, in his own gospel, in chapter 12, verse 16, says that His disciples did not understand these things at first. But when Jesus was glorified, they remembered that these things had been written about Him and had been done to Him. Matthew, like we just said a second ago, even after seeing Him raised, some still doubted. See, we can still wonder, even today, was that victory true? Even those that stood right in front of the risen Jesus weren't really sure what their eyes were seeing. So the question that goes on through to today is, do we believe in that victory? Yes, He was a king. Yes, He had followers. But did He achieve that victory? Now, today of all days is a day that I think we say yes. You know, Easter is the day when all Christians say to the world, He is risen. He has been risen. Do we say this because we were present there on Easter? Do we say this because we witnessed it with our own eyes? No, we say this because we believe that Jesus is alive and active in the world today. We believe that we have seen Him in our own lives, active and working. If He truly was raised, He was not raised to go sit in a corner and wait until His time comes. He was raised to be active and alive and working in this very world today. Christians are saying to the world on Easter, yes, we believe He achieved that victory. We believe that He is risen. Not that He was risen, but that He is risen, that He is alive and active in the world. Just think for yourself, do you believe in that victory? when I ask myself that question. I just think about what we're going through right now. This crisis, many times when writers write stories and movies about what would happen in a crisis, a lot of times it's this selfish behavior. They write it like everyone's going to turn their back on each other and they're going to be waiting for the opportunity to hoard up or to take from others. But yet you look, when this is all gone down, how many people did not do that? Just think about the medical professionals. That even though they know what challenge and what risk they're putting themselves in, each and every day they show up to work to save the lives of others, to be there with others when their family cannot. Those medical professionals that face that down each and every day, I see Jesus working through that. Well, I've seen Him in every other people that no matter what their situation is, they're finding ways to try to chip in and do something to encourage people through this difficult time. When you think of all the things that people are creating and finding ways to do, I see Jesus working through that. I've seen Him in the fact that some people, even though their backs are pressed against the wall, even though they are facing down death themselves, they make sacrifices the same way that Jesus did for us. It's not just in this crisis. And when I think of my own life, I can think of many more examples of how I've seen Jesus at work in my life around me. Do I believe in His victory? Absolutely. Do I believe that He is the King, that this good news of the kingdom is at hand? Absolutely. See, the world is not perfect. By no means. The kingdom is not fully done yet. Yes, we look around and we see all those things that I just said. You can think of counter examples of all that. But the good news of the kingdom is that Jesus is not done. See, we believe that He's alive and active, but we also believe that He is not done. That there will come a day when He will return just as He went away, and He will finalize that kingdom. He will put to completion all the things that we are waiting for. See, that is the hope that we hold on to. That is the reason that we take a day like Easter and say to the world, He is risen. Because we know that one day He will return and He will make all things right. Now, I started off by saying, I'm not going to be able to sum it up in one sermon. That was the overview. That was the quick way of looking at it. But this kingdom, Matthew took an entire 28 chapters explaining what Jesus' message was all about. And he wasn't the only one. 3 other gospel writers tried to explain this good news of the kingdom. And then we have Paul and many other writers trying to flesh out what that means, what that looks like. If you're sitting at home today and you're asking yourself, is this good news true? Is God reigning through Jesus Christ? You've got to dig deep and find for yourself. You've got to wrestle with this. You've got to come to your own answer. Because see, it said many doubted. But don't let doubt be the end. Let doubt be the thing that turns you to dig deeper and study it for yourself. Is Jesus on the throne? I believe so, 100%. I believe that there are answers for everything we experience in this world from His Word. I believe that that is the lens that helps me to understand the world around me. And my prayer is whoever you are on the other side of this, that you come to believe that same thing. If you're not a Christian and you want to wrestle with this more, but you want somebody to talk with you, please seek us out, because we would love nothing more than to explain to you the hope that we have, to explain to you the belief that we believe this kingdom is alive and active and present in the world today, and that we believe He will come again. My prayer is that if you're a Christian and you're struggling, that God show His face to you, that He comforts you through this difficult time. And just like we said many other times before, if there's anything that you need, please reach out to us. If you would, stay for just a little bit longer. Our elders have a special message that they would like to share. Thank you so much for listening, and may the Lord bless you and keep you.